Hi, in this tutorial we're going to look at how to progressive blur basically anything in Figma. You can replace this with any other picture, any other background, it doesn't matter, it'll blur everything. So we'll start by, as usual, deleting everything. Now before we do anything, let's look at the tools that we have available. How do we fake progressive blur in Figma? The previous tutorial talked about using layer blur. In this one, we'll use the trick that everyone has already tried using, which is using background blur, which lets this method work with basically anything. That doesn't mean it's a convenient method. You're probably never going to use this in production. It's just a gimmick and a sort of proof of concept. But since everyone's already made theirs, I'm going to do mine as well. So let's start with just seeing how this is going to work. So let's say we have an ellipse. And I have this ellipse. Now we add to it a background blur. The way that works is that you need to set this to, like, we're going to make it any color. And then you need to set it to something other than 100. And as you can see, whatever is behind there will get blurred. If we increase the blur over here, then you can see the effect. The only issue is that I don't want it black. The way you do that is by reducing the fill opacity to almost nothing, because if you reduce it to nothing, it doesn't work anymore. Now the reason I made it black is that if you set it to 1% and the fill is white, then you can still over here kind of see where the blur starts and ends, right here. To get rid of this, just set it to black. And then it works way better. So now we have this ellipse, which we can use to blur stuff. Let's make it a little bit more blurry just to make our point. There you go. This is how we're going to do the progressive blur. But right now, all the pixels under this ellipse are blurred the same. But this ellipse can become a ring. So if we just do this and bring this back. So now you see that we have a ring of blurred pixels. And you can imagine that if we had, let's say, another ring of blurred pixels, like this, except in this one, the blur was bigger. So just for the sake of the example, let's say 50. So now you see how we're going to build our effect. We're going to start around the face, and then we will add progressively more blurred rings. Like I said, not practical, will never be used in production. It doesn't even look that great, you know, because once you start increasing the blur too much, then you start seeing the rings. But it looks good enough as a gimmick, so we'll go ahead and do it anyway. So let's delete these rings, and let's do this in Generator. I'm going to create an ellipse. I'm going to give it a red color just so we can see it. And I'll set it to style. We increase inner to some value that we want. We're going to play with this later. We'll have a well-defined step and everything. But now there's something that we need to decide. Do we keep the rings the same size, or do we let them scale as they get bigger? Because, for example, inner in Figma comes in %, and there's no way to turn it into pixels. So as you increase it, you see that the ring gets thicker as well proportionally. That might not be what we actually want for this. What we want is for the ring to increase. Let me actually get this over here. Connect it like so. I'm holding control, which brings the value back to here. Also, this needs to be centered. This way, when I change the radius, it changes around the center. But as you can see right now, I'm changing the radius, and the ring thickness is changing proportionally with the radius. If that's not something I want, then I can go over here, and on inner I can just right click and instead of relative choose absolute. And now this becomes not a percentage but a pixel value, meaning that if your radius is smaller than the inner value, you're not going to see anything. And this is how we end up having rings of consistent thickness. So what we'll do is we'll just take the inner radius and add, let's say 10 or whatever our step size is. So what we do is we add a math node. I will hold control so that both of these go through the math node. It just gets inserted in the branch. I will then add 10, for example, and then I will plug this number directly into the inner value. And what's going to happen is here I now have 129, and here I have 139, which is what I wanted. So let me move this out of the way. Now as I change it, the ring will always keep its thickness the same regardless of the size. All right, so we're going to start with this. The next thing we need to do is I will give this a random color. And I will do it just so that we can see that the rings are different. I'll remove it later. So let me say 360. Doesn't really matter, it's just a utility node for now, like so. So this first one is orange, and then if I take this and repeat it, right now you have 5 rings. They're all in the same place. So I need to now sequence this radius. I'm going to call this radius. And I will add a sequence node. I'll start from 0, and then I'll add 10. And actually I'm going to connect this to here so that the step always matches the thickness of the ring, and I don't have to worry about it. Now I just need to connect this to the radius, like so. And there you go. We're starting from the middle, and we're just adding rings of more and more, of larger and larger radius. So now if I say I want, for example, 50 rings, I get 50 rings. Now for this example, to cover the whole picture, we're gonna want, let's say 70 rings. I don't know if that's gonna grab the corners. It basically does. All right, just so we can be sure, let's do 72. Whoops, not 2, 72. All right, there you go. This is our progressive blur. Now we're gonna remove the random color because we don't need that. Now we need to do some stuff. So first of all, we need to set this to black because that's the best way to get background blur out of Figma. So we'll set this to black. We will add a fill because we need to set the opacity to 1. There you go. So now you don't see, the rings are there as you can see, but they're not doing anything. That is because we need to add a combine to this so that we can add not just a fill, but also some effects. In this case, we want to add a background blur effect. And I'm just going to connect it like so. And now the whole picture should become blurred in a little bit. So now you see that the whole picture is blurred. We can make sure that that's actually the case by increasing the blur to like 30, in case it's not clear yet. All right, so now you see that we're actually getting blur built out of rings. Now we just need to sequence it. So we bring in a sequence. We say that we will start with 0 and increase the blur, let's say by 2 every time. It'll be really blurred very quickly, but we'll see how this looks. There you go. So it's less blurred here and more blurred here. But I think having just the nose be sharp, or the nostril in this case be sharp, and everything else be washed out is too much. So we will start the blur at -10. Obviously, the first 5 steps, it's going to end up being 0. So we will have a nice, thick, sharp middle, and then it'll start getting blurred. So I think this gave us a blurry mouth. No, did it finish the blur? So there you go. Now the face is, or the mouth is less blurred than the eyes. I think I'm going to move this up a little bit. So let me say -10 for the center. This means that we'll have to add another ring to the bottom of the picture. I think. I mean, yeah, okay. We'll add one more. 73. It's not going to take that much longer anyway. All right, so this is, the effect is done for the most part. The only thing is you can see the rings, they're really, really thick. We get around that by just changing the step size. So let's say we want to add not 10 every time, but, well, I don't want to do 1. That's going to be way too slow for this example. Let's do 2. So we'll have 2 pixel thick rings to simulate progressive blur in Figma. And it's going to be radial progressive blur, all proper. Just not very convenient to use because you have this right here. Although you can then group them. In fact, you know what? Let me just do this right now. So it's a little bit easier to manage. So I'm just going to say group. All right, so now it's a group. And look, you have the Mona Lisa as one object and the group as the second object. So as we have the group now, what we can do is we can grab it and actually just move the whole progressive blur. And once Figma realizes that you are a crazy person and you're trying to move 73 rings, each of which has background blur on it, it'll actually start doing it. It will take a while though. This effect is not cheap, even if it's the same level of blur for the whole ring. So that's how slow this is. All right, but we don't need that, so we will just refresh this. And we were going to set the step size to 2 pixels thick. What this is going to do though is it's going to collapse everything, and so the blur is not going to go out yet. You see, like this. So now you just see the nose, which means that we need to reduce, well, first of all, we need to increase the number of steps. So we'll do that last. First, we need to reduce the blurring progression. So we will start from, I think -10 is fine, but we're going to add, let's say 0.5 every time instead of 2. So in this case, we should get, all right, but it's still getting blurred way too fast. So maybe oh, I made it 0.5. Let's do 0.2. So this is now 2.5 times slower. All right, we don't see the effect because the circle is small, but you can kind of see it start here. So now all we need to do, and I'm using the word all very loosely here, we need to increase the number of rings. And let's say, okay, so if from here to here it's 73, then this is going to be like 100, 200, 300, and then something for the corners. Yep, we're going to go to 400 rings. And now it's time to go grab a coffee. So, it's done. Over here in the periphery, you don't even see too many artifacts. You see some, but I mean, we are using circles, so this is gonna happen. But in general, I feel like this is, it looks okay, but the wait took something like 2 minutes, which is a long time to wait, you know, when you're using Figma and doing some graphic stuff. You're not rendering 3D or anything like that. The reason I tell you this is that I don't want anybody to say, we found a way to do progressive blur in Figma. We have not. This is fake. It's not fake, it's real, but it's just, it's way too cumbersome. This is the definition of bending over backwards. It's just a proof of concept. But it looks cool, and that's why I did this tutorial. So, once again, if you like the work that I'm doing, if you would like to support me, the best way to do that is to buy a generator subscription. It's less than $1 a day, and it will help me keep making all this cool but sometimes pointless stuff. Thanks for watching.